to 3. Councillors, just doing an audio test. As you probably all know, that our video is out of action tonight, and we'll just be having the audio. So please speak closely to your microphones and nice and clearly. Okay, thank you, councillors. 5 o'clock, it's my pleasure to declare the ordinary meeting of Blayney Shire Council for December open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So, councillors, as mentioned before, and we are apologetic to the members of the community that have jumped on YouTube to see this meeting. Unfortunately, our video is out of action tonight, but we do have so please stay with us with the audio. Apologies for non-attendance. I believe we're all accounted for. Excellent. Disclosures of interest. Madam GM, do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening?
Yes, I have. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I have one declaration of conflict of interest, and that is from the Director of Planning and Environmental Services. The report title is a transfer of lease of the Visitor Information Centre Cafe. It is item number 13 on page 80. It is a pecuniary interest, and the reason for this interest is that the director's wife is the sole director of Ironbark Espresso Proprietary Limited.
Thank you, Madam GM. Councillors, we do have a public forum this evening, and I'd like to invite Ian Gillings to come up to the microphone. Ian is going to speak to item 24, the development application in regards to the change of use and internal alterations, Victoria Street, Millthorpe, the Grand Western Lodge. Thank you, Ian. About 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're getting close. Thank you.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me? Councillors and executives. My name is Ian Gillings. I'm the proud new owner of the Grand Western Lodge, Thorpe. I purchased it on the 28th of June, and as at that day it became my primary residence, and it is my primary residence now. So it's here, and I'm on a roll. Once the development at the Grand Western Lodge is finished, I'll be moving in there as the operator and manager. In the meantime, I'm employed by Transport for New South Wales. I'm a commercial director on Sydney Metro, and I'm also a non-executive director of New Royal Adelaide Hospital. Over the course of my life, I've worked in infrastructure as a banker and as a consultant, doing major roads, hospitals, Olympic Stadium, the Olympic Village, and major lumps of concrete and long pieces of steel. So Grand Western Lodge took my heart. I drove past it lots of times. I saw it as a fairly sad figure in a beautiful village, and decided that I was going to make it my tree change. It was once a 5-star hotel. It was once a facility or service to the community, which I think provided a good service for a while until its sorry demise and then its vacancy over the course of the last number of years. My aim is to bring a pulse back into what I call the heart of Millthorpe, and that building is certainly pretty close to the heart. And I think I can do that by a development which is sensitive to community standards, tributary to community commerce, and helpful for the whole ambience of the town. recent planning analysis of the region in Millthorpe has not showed huge growth. I think that with the employment that I can bring through employing people at the building, through laundry and through shops and through services provided, there will be an influx of substantial revenue into the village. Already I've committed hundreds of thousands of dollars to local suppliers and services. I didn't actually know that I'd end up with a curtain and a blinds factory at the end of my street, but they've collected one of their largest orders ever through me, and those curtains and blinds are sitting there ready to be installed. So I think the prospects for what I'm doing make a lot of sense. Whether or not that's what the prospects will be forever and a day, I'm none too sure, but certainly there's a huge demand. Talking to Orange 360 and the mines and contractors to the mines, there's a good opportunity to provide semi-permanent accommodation to people that are currently soaking up Airbnb space and honeymooners space. The facilities at Grand Western Lodge don't really suit honeymooners, but they do suit single people looking for good, quiet, safe, warm and cool accommodation, and I think I can provide that, and it'll be quite special. I've tried as hard as I can. I've done a lot of work on parking, done a lot of traffic study work, put in comprehensive submissions to you. I think the work has been done, and that argument is on paper, and it's been analysed by your people thoroughly and commented upon. You've provided me with 26, more than 26 actually, it's 26 and sub terms and conditions, all of which I've accepted and just said I'm committed to. I think I've got a compliant submission. I've accepted all your terms and conditions, and I encourage you to consent to my DA, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that presentation. Okay, councillors, now move through to our business paper. We have no mayoral in it. Item 1, page 5, General Manager's Performance Review. Recommendations there, 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Moved Councillor Ewan, second to Councillor Somervale. I'd like to nominate, I believe the General Manager has nominated Councillor Kingham to be her representative on this review panel, and I would like to nominate Councillor Denton to be the councillor member on that. If I could have support for those two nominations, Councillor, thank you, Councillor Newstead supported that. Okay, councillors, any questions or comments? Of course, I'll be asking other councillors who aren't on the review panel for their feedback and input next year before the review process takes place. No questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Item 2, page 7, minutes of the previous council meeting held 16th of November. Recommendation there. Is this a true record? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Any matters arising from those minutes, councillors? If not, move now through to item 3, page 15, Tourism Event Development Program. A recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You fully support these two events and encourage other community organisations and businesses throughout our shire recovering from COVID to apply. As the report says, I think there's still $15,000 worth of funds remaining, and we've only got 6 months to spend. So strongly encourage other events and community organisations to apply for this funding.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Councillors, page 17, item 4, Resources for Regions Program, round 7. Recommendations there 1 to 6. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Denton has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments on this very exciting program? All very good. Councillor Newstead.
No, I was just going to say what you said. It's very exciting. Finally be able to finish off Centrepoint, get the new roof and some solar panels. And I know people mightn't like the fact it'll be closed for a month or so, but you know, once it's done, that's it. And won't it be good to see it finished?
Absolutely, Councillor Newstead, well said. Definitely the icing on the cake, what is an amazing facility, and it's been well used and appreciated by our community. Councillors, no other questions or comments? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just make one comment endorsing what Councillor Newstead said. I think the money being spent to finish off Centrepoint is fantastic, and I think the one observation I make in relation to that is that there's the one item of capital expenditure where the additional depreciation, which we're going to suffer every year by the additional cost, is just about matched by the operational savings that it's going to deliver to the council. So if we can achieve that with all our major capital expenditure, we're way in front.
Very good observation, Councillor Somerville. Thank you. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, page 20, item 5, the BCO Alliance Agreement. Recommendations there 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any comments? Just like to, you probably heard or haven't heard yet that Bon at their recent meeting have approved this agreement, which is 1 out of 3 at the moment. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A question probably to the General Manager. With regard to the agreement, there's no mention of joint funding applications. Are the terms loose enough within this agreement so that the 3 councils, and I'll use the example of the bicycle pathway that was proposed by Orange 360, but I understand has been knocked back because they're of a commercial nature. But could this organisation apply for joint funding, for example, for that bicycle pathway through the 3 local government areas being Cabonne, Orange and Blayney? Or should we actually put an extra condition in there, or ask one extra condition be added that you could actually apply for, that this organisation could apply for government funding for joint projects amongst the 3 councils?
Madam GM.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll stand to be corrected, but I understand that by having the agent, the BCO Alliance, by having with 3 councils' agreement and giving the authority for the agent to do so, that agent, being the BCO Alliance Limited, can apply for funding and sign funding agreements. Yes.
Thank you.
Which would certainly be a great advantage moving forward. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Declared carried. Councillors, turn your attention now to page 38, item 6, Central New South Wales Business HQ. There's a recommendation there that we nominate Richard Beach. Have we got a Councillor Reynolds has moved that way, Councillor Somerville has moved that way, and I'd certainly take the
I
opportunity.
move it with one slight amendment in talking
moved.
with Richard Beach.
Yes.
And then we'll see if Councillor Somerville agrees. Just that Council approve the nomination of Mr Richard Beach, subject to his final acceptance as Council's representative on the Central New South Wales Business Enterprise HQ Board. So include the words subject to his final acceptance. And talking with him today, he was just doing some due diligence on that organisation before he finally accepts.
Seconder would be fine with that, I would imagine. Councillor Somerville?
Happy with that.
Yep, thank you. So, councillors, we have that slight amendment that Councillor Reynolds has put forward, supported by Councillor Somerville. Subject to, as we know, we've had a great success rate with the Skill Set Board, and I think in the future we should always try to where possible, look into our community for the skills that are required for some of these boards. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Councillor Reynolds for his involvement in that. I know it's been quite difficult at times, but his involvement has been very positive for the last couple of years, and I believe ended up chairing for a while as well. So I'd like to congratulate you on your time on that, what is a very important board. Councillors, we have a recommendation there. Any questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Councillors, item 7, page 39, minutes of the Blayney Shire Tourism, Towns and Village Committee meeting held 24th of November. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, I think, got in first. Councillor Reynolds, question, comment?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Business arising, Junction Reef's informal opening before Christmas. Due to legal complications and challenges, it will now be sometime in the new year for Junction Reefs. We still don't have a day, but hopefully January, but I don't want to put a time limit on it until legal proceedings or legal discussions are finalised or formalised. So we are still working as the Junction Reefs there to get that reserve open to the community. Baker's Shaft will be open over Christmas. And I'd just like to highlight there is actually a new fire sign there now approved by the Rural Fire Service. Rather than having the fire meter, the reserve, Baker's Shaft Reserve, is now closed with a very high and above fire danger rating. The sign actually says this and refers to the website. So a new way to do, because it's so far from everywhere, but to try and protect, even though sadly I did get reports, I think it was last weekend, there was someone who actually had a fire burning in Junction Reefs with the very tall phalaris grass. Luckily it didn't escape, but no matter how much you put signs up, people still ignore.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Very unfortunate. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, put the motion. Against? Declared carried. Page 43, item 8, report of council investments as at 3rd November. Recommendations are 1 and 2. Councillors do have a mover. Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Councillor Denton has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments? Councillor Kingham.
Mr Chairman, I'd like to ask the Director appropriately, is there any reason why the ANZ Bank has no funds invested in them?
Mr Director?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll have to take that question on notice. However, I believe if there's no investment with them, it'd be a matter of the fact that their rates aren't competitive with the others available.
ANZ.
Is that answer that the interest rates are offered are too low, or some other reason?
Look, I'll take the question notice and get a formal response. Be best.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just noting the amount of money, I think that's the highest amount since I've been on council in over 3 years that we actually have in our bank account at this point in time. Fortunately, again, as we've discussed previously, our biggest ratepayer came forth with the full year's amount, which has put us at that sort of level, but fantastic to see over $22 million as at the end of last month, the end of November, in council's reserves to undertake projects and continue the operation of council. Also interesting, just as a follow-on, that Reliance Bank has also, we've invested some money with Reliance Bank, though one quick question is that it is unrated. I assume in our policy we are allowed to deposit in unrated banks. So a question through to the Director, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr Director.
Through Mr Mayor, yes. Banking or investments with local institutions that, in this case, being a credit union, that is unrated, is permitted. But I think that's the only allowance in the policy.
Reynolds. Councillor Somerville.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think councillors will recall at the last meeting I expressed some concern about AMP Bank and the fact that we exceed our current limit with AMP Bank as a result of its downgrading. And I was inclined to move that when our current deposits with AMP Bank mature, that we don't reinvest the money with AMP Bank. I was dissuaded from that because it really should be something dealt with in our investment policy, which I was led to believe we were going to have a look at this meeting, or certainly set in train looking at our investment policy. I'm concerned, not overly concerned, but there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the future ownership of AMP Bank. There's a lot of discussion in the financial press about whether its IT systems are up to scratch for modern banking. And I'm just nervous when we've got plenty of capacity to be investing with other institutions, when the difference in the interest rates, they're all so small anyway, it doesn't seem sensible for us to continue investing with AMP Bank, in my view. Now, I know this is entirely an operational matter, so if councillors want to get involved in this, we've got to do it through a policy, and I'm happy to understand that. But I see be something at this meeting which might enable us to talk about this. So I'll just flag it again, and hopefully we can look at it on another occasion.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Mr Director, would you like to comment?
Thank you. It is planned that the policy come to the February meeting.
Okay, opportunity then in February. Okay, thank you, Councillor Somerville, for your concerns. Councillor Somerville.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. One point I was going to make is that I know that in deciding where to invest our money on term deposit, we take advice from an intermediary as to the possible institutions who will receive our money, and they seek to get the best rate possible for council, which is fine. It's at no cost to council, I understand, which in a sense is a bit of a worry because the intermediary is paid for their efforts by the bank with whom the money is deposited. So there's an incentive to deposit money with the institute, recommend to its clients. I'm not suggesting that it does, but there's an inbuilt conflict issue as to maximising the return it gets depending on which institution it recommends we place our money with. So I'm only a councillor, and I'm sure they know more about where to invest money than I do, but I certainly don't get any kickback from the banks if I recommended someone.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Councillors, we now refer you to page 48, item 9, our audited financial statements. Before I move to the recommendation, it's my pleasure to invite John O'Malley, our council auditor, to come up and make a presentation about how wonderful we went in the last financial year.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
Mayor.
John. No pressure at all.
No, well, it'll be pressure next year, I think, to better this year's numbers, really. Just by way of introduction, I'm John O'Malley. I'm a partner in the Orange Office of Intentus, who are engaged by the Audit Office to conduct the audit of Blayney Shire. I have acted in that capacity previously in a number of years. This is my first year back, though, after an independence holiday, so it's quite good to come back and see what's changed. What I'll talk about today is, there we go, is broadly the financial statements, but there's a little bit of I guess, advertising for the Audit Office and talking about what they're doing as well, and some of the, in particular, the performance audits which they're undertaking, which are not centred solely on financial statements, but can look around operational effectiveness and efficiency and those sorts of things. So the areas for focus for the report to Parliament, which will be tabled around about March next year, are on some familiar suspects: asset valuation, cyber security, fraud controls, IT, governance management, procurement, shared services. So fairly broad there, but it'll be interesting. I mean, it's been an interesting year in local government, I think, above and beyond the pandemics and everything else. There's been plenty happened, so that report should be well worth a read. Looking ahead to what they're looking forward to on some of the performance audit fronts, they're looking at credit card management, developer contributions and voluntary planning agreements, the management of procurement, and then post that audit committees, cybersecurity and rural water supplies. Turning then to Blayney and the financial reports this year, there were a few things that were significant in the financial statements this year. This year was the first that we had to apply some new accounting standards, and normally that's not something to become too excited about, but the ones that were introduced and had effect this year did have some impact. Two of them, AASB 15 and 1058, relate to the timing of when you recognise revenue. In particular, it sort of goes back to what was known as the matching principle, so that where previously, once you obtained the money or the right to receive the money associated with the grant, you had to recognise the income, even if you hadn't undertaken any of the works that were required under that, you still recognise the income at that point. Now we're back to more of a matching process, so you identify whether there are specific performance obligations in a contract, and you recognise revenue to the extent that you've satisfied those obligations. So we're much more akin to the matching process. And that saw the first time application of that saw the recognition of new items. One was the contract asset, which is basically a receivable where we've undertaken some work, we've put in a claim for payment, and we hadn't received it at year end. So rather than having a debtor, as we would have in the past, we have what's known as a contract asset. And on the flip side, what was previously you would have called unearned income if you were allowed to, you'd have recognised the revenue. We had a contract liability, so that was for funds that we'd received but we hadn't satisfied those performance obligations. The other new standard was AASB 16, which is the leasing standard, and the background to that one was there's an English fellow, Sir David Tweedy, who was the head of the International Accounting Standards Board. Back in the days, if you can cast your mind back when there used to be international travel, he was flying on a flight and he got fed up with the fact that he never landed in a jet that had sat on the balance sheet of the airline he was flying with. Airlines typically don't own the infrastructure, they lease it, and he wanted to see those jets on the airline's balance sheet. So that was the impetus for this accounting standard. And so what it's meant is that anything that you previously would have considered to be a rental arrangement, which runs for more than 12 months, or is for an item of equipment that's worth more than a token $10,000, now comes onto the balance sheet and is recognised as what's known as a right of use asset, and then we depreciate that asset over its useful life, and the rental payments reduce the contract liability that we have for that. So this saw the recognition of $105,000 in lease liability with a corresponding right of use asset, and that was mostly for exercise equipment over at Centrepoint. Second big thing this year was the asset valuations, and this year was the big year. It was the roads, bridges, footpaths, curb and gutter and stormwater drainage. So the biggest category of infrastructure. It's a big exercise, and the overall outcome was a net movement of 28 million in the carrying value. But that was after the third thing, which was significant this year. That was a recognition of a prior period error. And this one was probably no surprise to me, because the last time that I was standing as council's auditor was on roughly that 5 years ago when this class of assets was revalued, and we raised some reservations around the stormwater drainage and the culverts, and also through the some of the useful lives of the roads. That was looked at again this year, and it was also subject to the engagement of external consultants to come and have a look as well, and they did determine that there was adjustments required. So there was a $31 million adjustment, being a correction to the prior carrying values that were the identification of assets which hadn't previously been brought onto the books, or changes in some of those useful lives. So that was a fairly significant adjustment. Moving on then to the operating result, and as I say, it's a fairly substantial operating result. You can see that the bottom line figure for the 2020 year was a surplus of 8.19 million. That's after the recognition of capital amounts. For capital amounts, there was still a surplus at just shy of $2 million, which you can see is well up. So the operating activities were producing a surplus as well. There's a couple of big contributors to that, and I'll have a look at those. On the income side, as you would expect with the rate pegging environment, we don't see significant movement in rate revenue outside of a special rate variation, notwithstanding changes in mining rates, and I'm not going to rabbit warren just yet. So the rates income was 8.8 million, up from 8.5 million the previous year. Operating grants and contributions were very similar to last year at just over 4 million. Capital grants and contributions were down. Last year we had the Southern Coast Access and the Drought Communities funding, which really bumped up the capital grants, but still fairly significant at just over $6 million. User charges and fees were down a little on previous years, partially again through, with the closure of Centrepoint for the works there. There was no user charges coming through there. Annual charges, very similar with rates, modest increase there. Interest revenue, as with your previous discussion, as the investments are renewed, the rates which they're being placed at are very record lows, and that's impacting upon council's interest income, notwithstanding growth in the level of your cash and investments. And then the significant one here was in the other income. Council recognises its proportionate interest in Central Tablelands Water in the financial statements. And the way it has to do that is from the most recent available audited information. Now, at the time that Blayney prepared their financial statements, that was the 2019 financial statements for CTW. They hadn't completed 2020. And that was the year in which the pipeline from Orange through to Blayney was constructed and came into CTW as a capital contribution, which saw their result boosted by that $12 million capital contribution. And council's proportionate interest in that was a $4 million share of that, which is what was recognised this year. So that's why that other income is up by that 4 million mark, and that certainly had an impact upon the operating result. On the other side, on the expenses, not as big swings on that front. Employee costs were actually down a little on the previous year. Materials, which fluctuates depending upon how much work you're doing on maintenance and how much work you're doing on new infrastructure. Materials came in at fractionally higher than last year at 2.75 million. Depreciation expense came in at 5.6 million. Notably though, that's on the previous values of the roads, bridges, footpaths. They will be depreciated next year on the revalued amount. They weren't this year, so with that 32 million net increase in the value of that infrastructure, that's likely to impact upon the depreciation, although there were some adjustments to useful life assessments as well, so some of those assets will be depreciated over a slightly longer period. Borrowing costs have moved up, and I'll look at borrowings in a moment, and then other costs were all similar to last year, but again, as we've replaced infrastructure that still had a carrying value, we've recognised the write-off of that as an expense. So total expenses came in at 19.5 million, up from 18.9, and the combination of the two gives us the $8 million surplus. Looking then at your cash and investments, quite apart from the bottom line, the addition of all those amounts to give what's now I think nearly 20 million in investments that we've got. The notable thing is the mix that you have in terms of externally restricted, internally restricted and unrestricted funds. We've, for the first time since 2017, seen some notable growth in the level of unrestricted funds. The external restrictions are typically sewer money or grant funds that can only be spent for a particular purpose, and so council doesn't have a great deal of discretion about how that's utilised. The internal restrictions council sets itself through the operational plan and the longer strategic plan and what projects you vote money to, and then that unrestricted provides some buffer so that the ebb and flow of operations are covered, and that there's some rainy day money as well, as there needs to be. And as you can see, there hasn't been for a little while, so it's pleasing to see that return to a modest level of unrestricted funds. There's a number of ratios that are reported in the financial statements to measure councils, and there's benchmarks for each of those, and a lot of them, though, I'd have to say, require some context if you're really going to take any meaning out of them. They're not a great form of comparison, I'd have to say. The first one to report on, though, is the unrestricted current ratio. What this looks at is, how many dollars of short-term asset have we got to meet a dollar of short-term liability, and then we take into account the additional consideration that some of our dollars of cash investments and receivables are externally restricted. So if we take them out of the pool, what are we left with? The outcome here was we had $4.71 of short-term asset to meet a dollar of short-term liability. The benchmark there set at $1.50, so we can see that Blayney's comfortably surpasses that measure. And it says to me that you're able to meet your debts as and when they fall due. For external debt, I'd touch on that. You can see there's been some steady growth in that. Total borrowings at 30 June was just under 7.8 million, up from just under 5.8 the previous year. We drew down 2,500 in the 2020 year. Mostly, I think, related to Centrepoint, but my memory is starting to fail me as we get closer to Christmas. In terms of what that impacts upon in the ratios, the first of those is the debt service cover ratio, and what it looks at is how easily can council meet the principal and interest payments associated with that borrowing. The higher the number, the more comfortably you're able to pay it. The number of times over you're able to pay it. So you can see that as a result of having drawn down more funds, that ratio has been coming back. We finished 2020 at a figure of 5.3. The benchmark is at 2%. So again, it's still suggesting that we're not in a significant strain as a result of the borrowing that's been taken on. Operating performance ratio is one of the measures to see, I guess, how well council manages its expenditure. So did you spend exactly what you received? Did you spend more than what you received or less than what you received? The target there is 0, because 0 would represent that you spent no more than what you generated, a negative figure indicating that we spent more than what was generated, and a positive figure indicating that there was a net saving. The outcome this year was a figure of 5, which is down on previous years, but again, it's one of those ratios that I don't think has an awful lot of meaning. It needs to be taken with some measure of what was actually happening in the council at the time. The Outsource operating revenue, again, talks about how council is generating funds to spend. So it's how much flexibility do you have in the money that's coming into you. If it's all coming in the form of externally restricted grants, your hands are tied. If there's more entrepreneurial activity that's bringing in some money, you've got some flexibility. The target there is 60%, with the aim being that council is spending, is generating at least 60% of its own money. It's a bit of a funny measure though, because it takes both operating and capital grants into account. And so if you get a lot of capital grant funding, which has been quite successful in doing, and additionally the CADIA money, that drives you down beneath the benchmark. Now, if I'm a ratepayer of Blayney, I'd be very happy that you're spending other people's money and not mine. So the longer you live it below that 60% measure, the happier I am, I think. But nonetheless, if you looked at that in isolation, you'd say that the performance is actually deteriorating. I think the story behind that is quite the opposite. It's just that we've been successful in obtaining external funding. The opinion that was issued, I mean, after there was quite a bit of to and fro, and I'd like to convey our appreciation to Tiffany, the CFO, because there was a lot of back and forth on the financial statements this year in both addressing with the new accounting standards, but also the revaluation and then the rejigging of that sort of late in the game. It was a drawn-out process, I'd have to say, and right throughout she was cooperative and responsive, and we certainly appreciated that. So the report in the end was issued without any qualification. Council met all of its disclosure obligations. There's been a final management letter issued just last week, so that's out there. And as I say, our thanks to council staff for their preparation. Blayney was certainly one of the better prepared councils, but also right throughout the audit to the death, their assistance. Having covered those points, though, if there's any questions on the financial statements or the audit, I'd be happy to field those.
Thank you very much, John. Very good presentation. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question or perception, this is probably the biggest challenge. When we put up the preliminary report to send to the auditors, we were made a loss of around about 1.8 million. Finally presenting the final audited report, and we've made a profit of $1.99 million before grants and contributions, yet we're taking into account the contribution from Central Tablelands Water of $4 million. Yet when it says down here, net operating result for the year before grants and contributions, most of that $4 million was in the form of grants and contributions. So it's potentially, I know while they're using the equity method, but realistically it's smoke and mirrors that we're stating something down at the bottom of the accounts which is not technically correct, because it is a grant with regard to the construction of the pipeline that Central Tablelands Water did. So I'm just wondering, from an auditor's point of view, why do we have that comment down the bottom when it's not 100% correct?
For the very reason that we have the chairman of the International Accounting Standards Board sitting on a jet thinking up things that end up on our financial statements. The council has to apply international financial reporting standards, which are designed for multinational corporates. They require the use of the equity method, as you've identified, and council recognising its proportionate interest in Central Tablelands Water. Going back to Accounting 101, your lecturer would have said to you, you can't spend profit. This is very much the same situation. It's not cash, it's not funds that council can apply to any particular purpose, it's just recognising your notional ownership interest in the result of CTW for the 2019 year. And for the same reason, you would run the council based off your operational and long-term financial plan, not off your external financial reports.
Great, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Somerville.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just following up on that comment about Central Tablelands Water. I remember when this came in, the need to equity account the interest in county councils. It did seem to me a bit strange that really this council didn't form, and its other councils didn't form Central Tablelands Water. It's a totally independently constituted body under the Local Government Act. Council really, apart from nominating members to its governing body, really has no control. Certainly can't call for its equity to be converted into dividends or to cash in any way. It's understand the equity accounting principle, but when it applies to local government councils, equity accounting a county council, it seems to me to be stretching it a fair bit.
I don't disagree with the sentiment. I simply though have to see that the letter is applied, and because of council's ability to determine a proportionate 30% or 33% interest in the voting by selecting its representatives, it gives it significant influence, and that's the determining factor is as to whether or not it's recognised in the equity accounting.
Yeah, I understand that. I think the councillors, when they're sitting on the council of a county council, owe their responsibilities to the ratepayer of that particular county, not to... anyway, we can talk about this.
The accounting standard, you won't find any mention of county councils.
No. One other comment, though, on the own source revenue ratio, where you say, yes, it's good to be below 60% because someone else is paying for what we're building, which is true. I guess the significance of it, though, is that our own source revenue we've got some control over. When it comes to grants and contributions, we don't really have all that much control over it. We're doing very well, but at the end of the day, it's the whim of other levels of government as to how much money is available for different programs and who they're going to give it to. So I can see that there is a particular point in looking at a ratio which just looks at your own source revenue, because that's what you can control.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments? John, certainly happy to hear that you thought we were a well-paired council. We're very fortunate to have excellent staff who do a wonderful job and have done for many years. And it is a bit of a moving feast, local government finance, and I learn something every minute of every day of local government finance. No questions, other questions or comments? John, I thank you for your attendance here tonight and appreciate your efforts in conducting the audit on behalf of Blayney Shire Council. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we now back to our recommendation. We have a mover for recommendations 1 and 2. I think Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Newstead has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now we move through to item 10, page 55, the Community Financial Assistance Policy Amendment. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Somerville. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this policy amendment? If not, put the motion. All in favour? Declared carried. We all love a good policy. Okay, councillors, item 11, page 67, adoption of work health and safety policy. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan. I second that. Questions, comments, councillors, on this policy? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 12, page 72, information security policy. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Denton has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, thank you. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I'm not quite sure whether we can bring our auditor back in, but with regard to...
Sigh, Councillor Reynolds?
Sorry?
That was a big sigh.
No, as in I noticed in the auditor's report that they were talking about IT, etc., and we've got this policy here, and I didn't get the opportunity to ask the auditor, it slipped my mind, but from an auditing point of view, whether the auditor is able to actually indicate whether this policy and what council has done is to a satisfactory level from an auditing point of view.
I'm sure we could take that on notice, and I'm sure John would ponder that. Thank you, John.
Or
Thank
maybe
you.
we could send it to our auditor for next year to whether our policy covers.
Absolutely, critically important. Okay, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, I'll now move through now to... Been quite melt down here on my iPad. Here we go. Okay, thank you. Councillors, item 13, page 80. Transfer of lease of Visitor Information Centre Cafe. Mark, our Director of Environmental Services, has declared an interest in this item and has left the chamber. The recommendations there 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Denton has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to this item? If not, very exciting. I will put the motion. All in
I'm just going
favour?
to ask one question, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Reynolds.
Councillor Kingham has been asking a bit about the Sunday policy, whether they're potentially going to open. Has that been discussed with the new proponent?
Not sure. Madam GM?
So through Mr Mayor, they're going to see how they go and trial potentially a coffee window open for Sunday mornings. Hopefully the local residents and visitors will support the business, and certainly if it's profitable, the business will make their own business decision about opening on weekends and their hours and public holidays.
Thank you, Madam GM. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. If no other questions or comments regarding this item, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Could someone please invite the director back into the chamber? Okay, thank you, councillors. Item 14, page 82, lease agreement, Neville Multi-Purpose Court. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do I have a seconder?
Thank you.
Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Questions or comments, councillors, regards to this item? Councillor Newstead.
Now that this has been done, will that mean that there'll be some movement on the court and it being completed for the
Movement on the court. Madam,
Through you, Mr Mayor, the movement of the court or the project planning was in progress anyway. This is just an aside issue that we had to deal with.
thank you, Madam GM. Councillor Kingham.
Well, this is a much-needed legal matter, and we're in debt to the Presbyterian Church at Neville for making the land available. It's right next to the park and the school, so it's a most appropriate place for a multi-purpose court. The issue is, we received a grant to build the courts, as I understand it, and I'm just wondering what the procedure for that is. Is this the last legal hurdle that needs to be undertaken before we actually call for construction, or have we actually accepted a tender for the construction?
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Mr Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we're actually right in the last throes of finalising the design work, and then we will go towards tender in the new year.
Thank you, Mr Director. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A question probably to the General Manager, but maybe the Director. Now, it's a 50-year lease from my reading of the report, going up from $1 with inflation. But we've just seen with the Anglican Church sell off or propose to sell off in Carcoar property. They've just sold one in Forest Reefs. As in, what happens if the Presbyterian Church decides that it wants to start selling its property? What rights do we have over that 50 years to hold them, or could we just see our court transferred to someone else privately? Does this contract actually protect council and the asset for 50 years, or how are we protecting this asset so that tomorrow the Presbyterian Church doesn't turn around and sell the property with a multi-purpose court at the back of it?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Madam GM.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we stand to be corrected, but the church didn't want to sell the block of land, so they wanted to enter into this lease agreement. If another entity wants to take ownership and the running costs and operations of a multi-purpose court in Neville, that would be a consideration for council to consider. I'm not sure that anyone would be willing to put up their hands to do that. I think council is really the best organisation to do that. By having the subdivision process means that we have the lease noted on the certificate of title, which I assume would provide protection for council for the tenancy and the agreement in place that we're signing now.
Thank you, Madam GM. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, no other questions or comments regards to this item. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 15, page 84, Crown Lands Plan of Management Program update. We do have a slight amendment to this recommendation, I believe. Mr Director, would you like to
Thank you,
talk to
Ms
it?
Smith, through you. Councillors, an email was sent to you today to advise councils received advice from DPI, or Department of Primary Industry, and to advise that cemeteries do not fall under the plans of management program. It's a technicality. However, cemeteries have been devolved to council under the Local Government Act, whereas council is the appointed Crown Land Manager under the Crown Lands Management Act for the other parks, ovals and facilities. So whereas we report to you in this paper about having plans of management for cemeteries, that won't be the case. We will be only proceeding with the plan of management for the natural area parks, sports grounds and general community use. It's proposed that the recommendation just have an addition to that published, the addition of noting cemeteries are not included in the Crown Lands Plan of Management Program.
Thank you, Mr Director. Councillors, you'll note the amendment up there on your screens. The chance to read it. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds, thank you, has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item, and or Councillor Somervale?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I must admit I'm a bit confused. The original report, of course, assumed we needed to have plans of management, and it's, in a sense, it's good to see we don't need that. But my understanding was that one of the benefits of having a plan of management and passing these resolutions that are referred to in the report under the Local Government Act protects the native vegetation, it protects Aboriginal culture, heritage and so on indefinitely. So I don't know whether not having plans of management for the cemeteries means that we are not going to get, and I know Brian Parker was very keen on this, we're not going to get the protection that he was looking for by passing resolutions categorising the cemeteries as conservation areas, declaring them to be land containing natural features, and declaring, in the case of Neville, that the land comprises significant items of Aboriginal cultural heritage. I'm not quite sure where the benefit we were looking for under the original approach, whether that can be achieved or not. That was my first sort of, I'm not sure, I'm just a bit confused about all that. The second thing was we're not having, not being part of the plans of management, because we don't need to do that according to the advice we've got. But the advice also said, in order for council to manage these reserves, you'll need to be appointed as the Crown Land Manager under the Crown Land Management Act. And then the email today, council has the option to amend how cemeteries are managed. However, by application for appointment as Crown Land Manager, however, this is not considered necessary. My reading of the email from the Crown Lands people was, in order to manage them, we needed to be appointed Crown Lands Manager. I'm just, I'm happy with the resolution, because we're just putting all this aside. We can sort that out another day, but it's raised more questions in my mind as to exactly how we stand in relation to our own management of the cemeteries and protecting the native vegetation and the cultural heritage in the cemeteries.
Through
Mr. Director.
So the logic behind not proceeding down the path was that that the cemeteries would be protected by the operational plan of management. However, we can bring back a further report and go down the path of making application to become reserve, Crown Reserve land manager if council so desires.
I'd just be interested in knowing whether the manager of Parks and Gardens is happy with this result, or whether there's something we can do that would protect what he's trying to protect.
Thank you, Councillor Sunvale. Very good point. I think we should definitely look at that. We do want to protect the cemeteries. Maybe our operational management plan doesn't go far enough. Okay, thank you, councillors. Any other questions or comments with regards to this item? We have a mover in Councillor Reynolds, second Councillor Ewan. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 16, page 90, sale of land for unpaid rates, auction results. So we have a recommendation there. Report be received. Do I have a mover? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. A second that. Questions, comments? If not, I'll put Councillor Reynolds.
So I'm just going to say a good result with the clearance of all but 2 and 1 withdrawn because of boundary issues. So a good result in recovering, and as the report also says, another report will come back to council with regard to landlocked, which is a potential challenge. So it'll be interesting to see what options are put forward to try and recover rates from those 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Yes, the General Manager has a plan to sort that out. So we'll wait for that report to come back to Council. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Item 17, page 92, the IPART, the update to the IPART rating review mining rate. The recommendation there that this be received, this report. Do I have a mover? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder?
Move, Mr Mayor, with 2 additions.
Well, yeah, if we can get a seconder for it, why not?
I'll
Would-
float the 2 additions and see if I can get a seconder.
Well, and up, yeah, okay.
So the second, so recommendation that's currently there is number 1. Number 2 is council makes representations to the Premier and Deputy Premier over the issue. And number 3, I'll just wait for Lauren to... The Premier and Deputy Premier over the matter. Number 3, council form a working group of councillors and senior staff, develop options for when and if the recommendation is implemented. If and when the a recommendation is implemented. Happy to speak to it if there is a seconder.
Okay, we good? Okay, Councillor Reynolds has put forward a couple of additions. His recommendation, do we have a seconder for this? We'll discuss these. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The response from the Minister, Shelley Hancock, is very concerning. I've got to say, I understand that the state government's trying to implement reform, but this, as Councillor Somervale has stated previously in a previous report that's come up to Council, will potentially see a loss in rate revenue of around about $2.8 million, or nearly 1/3 of our general rate revenue, if this report is recommended and it's recommended, and the state government has indicated here that they're going to proceed with it, and particularly the concerning the excuses or beliefs in the savings will be minuscule from our council point of view compared to the net loss in revenue. I really believe that as council we need to make stronger recommendations to both the Premier and the Deputy Premier, and fairly urgently, sometime in January, once government is in business after the Christmas break, to try and see how we can go about other reform, or whether the government will delay, because there's no indication whether next financial year we could have this recommendation number 34 implemented, which would, as I've stated previously, have a substantial impact on our rate revenue. And it's not just our council. In looking at our neighbouring Gabon council, I believe they, on calculations of their business rate, would lose around about $1.6 million. Blandshire Council would lose a large amount of money. Cobar, a huge number of councils would lose, and particularly in the Hunter Valley. And it'll be interesting. I'll ask the Mayor shortly, once I've finished, whether he can update us on the mining and energy related council meeting that was held here in Blayney, and what response was received to his presentation at that meeting. And so that's the second part, is to make that representation and make it reasonably quickly. The third part is to form a working group, because if we're rejected, we've got to come up with a plan B. And at the moment we don't have a plan B, and if it is next financial year, and again I've got no idea whether it's going to be in 6 months' time or 18 months' time that this recommendation will be implemented, we have to be ready as a council to look at various options, whether it's a reduction in services, whether it's an increase in farm rates and general business rates and community housing rates, or whether there are other options that we have to consider. So it really concerns me what the response of the Minister, Shelley Hancock, to the letter from the council, from the Mayor. So thank the Mayor for providing that letter, but we have to be ready. So hence why I've put the third part of that recommendation, to look at various options and be ready to present them to the community if the state government will not back down on that report, and particularly number 34 in that report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Yes, as previously discussed in this council, it is a very important matter. As far as the Association of Mining and Energy related councils are concerned, I guess they're potentially in the same position as us and all councils at the moment, is that we are waiting for the draft bill to come to us, as the Minister told us that we would have access to that bill. Now that was supposed to happen today. It hasn't, so that is very concerning, considering the time of year and the certain urgency. So the Mining and Energy Related Council, the association, wait, if you like, until that draft bill was presented, and just to see what the detail was. But they also resolved to act very strongly and decisively if the bill wasn't to our liking. As you have hinted, that if it's not, well, we'll certainly need to ramp up the lobbying. The association have already identified people in that association to lobby on our behalf. The President of New South Wales, Linda Scott, has had personal meetings with the Minister about this particular matter, and I think the Minister has thanked her for that, as I have. The reality is we just do not know what the draft bill has in it. So yes, we do need to be ready. Yes, we are totally against it, as our application, as our submission hinted, and there's certainly plenty of other councils that are in the same boat. So while we are waiting to see what that draft bill looks like, obviously it will not, there'll be some serious representation made next year if that draft bill comes out endorsing that recommendation by IPART. So
Mr.
that
Mayor,
will happen.
I'm happy to make one quick modification then, that the council makes representation if the draft bill recommends an implementation or implements recommendation number 34.
Well, I mean, I think we're happy to leave it as it is. I think all councillors would be supportive of that. I think it's an obvious thing that we would do, but we would do it through, in the first instance, Local Government New South Wales, who represents all the councils in New South Wales, and also through the Association of Mining and Energy-related Councils, and thirdly, as you've suggested, by ourselves. But let me assure you that we'd be fighting to get into the room with Bland and Cabon and the other councils in regards to representation on this issue. This is an extremely serious issue, but we just need to know this is part of a big bill in regards to flexible ratings that we may or may not have the opportunity to do. So we are very concerned about it. And as far as your third recommendation, certainly couldn't hurt to come together once we do understand what the intent of the state government is. The councillors, we have a recommendation there which has been added to by Councillor Reynolds, 2 and 3. We have a mover, we have a seconder. Do we have any other questions or comments? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As councillors have heard me before on this, I think this has the potential to be the biggest threat to the financial viability and indeed the independence of Blayney Shire Council since the mergers a few years ago. And the thing I find troubling about it is that the letter from the Minister says, wait till you get the exposure draft and then we'll listen to your comments. The problem with that, and the problem I think with the government's approach generally in relation to recommendation 34, is the principles behind the recommendation. Why is it that IPART made this recommendation, and therefore what are the principles that the government on the face of it has endorsed are not clear. I can't see how a draft bill can be prepared to give effect to a recommendation when the principles giving rise to that recommendation are not clear. The government has said very little, both in relation to the first draft of the recommendation and in relation to the final version, very little as to why it supports the recommendations, and IPART said very little as to why it thought it was a good idea, other than referring to other jurisdictions which don't have councils like us. They referred to Victoria. They don't have councils like us with big mining rate revenues. It's not a big mining state, Victoria. And so why you use Victoria as a model for something for New South Wales where it's totally different, I don't know. Victoria's being very independent. New South Wales is being very independent at the moment. Why they can't be independent in relation to this one is beyond me. So I think this is a really serious threat, and I support what Councillor Reynolds has said in relation to continuing the lobbying. I think it probably carries more weight through LG New South Wales and the mining-related councils, but nevertheless we should do what we can. But I think the focus should be on trying to nail the government as to why they think, why they support this recommendation, why they think the IPART recommendation is a good way to go, because you need to know that before you can comment on the exposure draft. In other words, to do the lobbying we need to lobby based on some flaw in the principles behind it, rather than what comes out at the other end. So I support the recommendations, and I also support the idea that we should have a weather eye to the worst case and be forming a bit of a working group to brainstorm just what we can do, if anything, if this passes through into law in due course.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Very good summary of the situation, and I can assure you though the lobbying will be ramping up big time. Mind you, my understanding is the coal mining industry rating works a bit different the way than we are. So I think the coal mining councils aren't probably that affected potentially. Still affected, but not as much as we are, because the value of the product is market value as opposed to the resource in the ground. So, councillors, any other questions or comments regards this? Councillor Ewan?
Comment. Thank you, Mr Mayor, in support of my fellow councillor, Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Somervale. Most definitely correct. We need to be proactive. We need to have that representation as an independent council. We have quite a lot at stake here in our shire, particularly it's our obligation to our ratepayers to defend whatever the draft is and ask the questions, as Councillor Somervale has stated. It would be very devastating to us as a council. So I'm very supportive to our council to follow this through and be there to look after our council and our fellow ratepayers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. Councillor Reynolds will now close the debate.
Mayor, even though there was no one against or spoken against this recommendation, the one other interesting factor that I found in doing some analysis was if, for example, Cadia were to save, or Newcrest was to save around, say, $3 million, just to use round figures, the Commonwealth Government would benefit roughly $900,000 because it's a tax deduction. So Commonwealth revenue would go up by $900,000. I think the mining royalties would also go up, so the state government would get more money, and yet we'd lose roughly $3 million. So it's a switch in funding, or tax, I suppose you could say, from a council rate, and the Commonwealth will actually probably benefit the most out of this recommendation. So again, from what Councillor Somervale has said, we really need to see the logic behind this recommendation, and we can't really see anything, and that's really frustrating. So we need to try and at least try and find out why there is logic and why the state government is trying to put more money into the Commonwealth coffers, as an example, over local council. I really find that quite concerning and disturbing. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I recommend these three recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
It's a case of the state government deciding that income shifting is a good idea, not only cost shifting.
Well, there's a methodology for you, Councillor Somervale. We need a methodology. Okay, thank you, councillors. I'll now put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Right.
Declared carried. Move now through to item 18, page 96, Director Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. Recommendation there. Councillors, do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to the Director's report? Councillor Kingham.
Mr Chairman, I'd just like to commend the staff, the amount of work that they're completing. We have a new operations manager who's fitting in sweetly, and there's just so many things going at the one time that I recognise and have to accept that some things can't be done as quickly as we'd like. However, there's a lot happening, and I commend the staff for their work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kingham. Certainly endorse those comments. Councillors, Councillor Newstead.
I'd just like to endorse Councillor Kingham's comments there, and I just wonder how many people have been down to have a look at Dacres Oval with the new fence around it. It just sets it off. It's unbelievable. I saw it driving down to IGA the other day, and I thought, gosh, we could be in England here.
Barrel.
Yeah, Barrel, yep, that's a better place. But yeah, to Grant and the staff, you're doing a great job.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillor Reynolds.
Mayor, I'd just like to commend the partnership between the Blayney Town Association and our team with regard to the planters in the main street. As in, I know it's something that the Town Association has been pushing for a number of months, probably about a year or so. So great to see those planters. Also great to see that we now have 66 kilowatts of solar installed at the sewage treatment plant, which should cut our operating costs. and also put a little bit back into the grid, though the price seems to be falling for solar feed into the grid at the moment. And the other important one, and to commend our staff again and through the director, the treated effluent recycling water treatment plant that we're moving ahead. Construction has started. The chlorine contract tank and the water storage tank are now installed, but we're looking potentially for commissioning in late January. So that's only a bit over a month away if we can stay to and get the parts that we need. But that's fantastic that we will be able to reuse our water. One of the most environmentally conscious councils in reusing the water. I notice, comments from Orange City Council about, how can they recycle. We've actually gone and done it off our own back, out of our own funds, to put that plant in and put it back on our sporting fields, that we've got most of the piping underway, the pumps, etc. So a fantastic project, and hopefully we can start using our own water back again onto our own sporting fields in late January or February, once that plant is commissioned and given the tick-off. I think it has to get government approval before we can finally use it, but looking very, very good. So commend the director and all the staff for all the work that they've done, and endorse what my fellow councillors have been saying about the amount of projects. A huge list there of projects, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to Councillor Ewan?
Our long-term planning for a potential bypass of Blayney, it's good to see that we have moved through the first stage 1 and 2 and now to the potential of putting a business case together for the project. I think we all realise this is a long term, but that's tremendous planning for our council, because there will come a day, and we may not be here on God's earth, but when that day comes, it'll be from the early planning of this council here today that will make that project come to be when need be.
Thank you, Councillor
Thank
Ewan.
you, Mr.
Councillors,
Director.
thank you. Any other questions or comments regards to this report? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Item 19, page 102, proposed fees, Blayney Showground Equestrian Gator and Rake fees and the Australian Ranch Horse. Recommendations there 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether recommendation number 1 should read $1,640, given that we're proposing to increase the $400 for all the other groups, and that would take it up, but it sort of more indicates that the for seasonal hire user groups be exhibited, so $400. So I'm just wondering whether it should be $1,640 or whether recommendation number 2 covers that with the $400.
Through you, Mr Mayor,
Madam
can
GM.
we just keep it separate? Because I'll invoice them, there'll be a seasonal user charge, and then there'll be the additional $400 for the gator hire, please. So we'll just itemise that, if that's okay.
Okay, it's got to change it. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Kingham.
Well, this is moving along very nicely, as I hoped it would. What we call the big shed, which is used for equestrian and other things. Started with 3 horse groups. Now we have 6, and that may not be the end of it. The issue is, will the groups maintain the sand surface? That's we're encouraging them to maintain the surface themselves rather than get the council to have to do it. So there's been a lot of toing and froing on the amount of water, and we've come to the conclusion that there should be a small tractor available to level the sand. And this is an ongoing thing, trying to get the sand to the degree of toughness, I suppose you'd say, that's suitable for all the activities that they have. I think we've resolved this question of cattle being allowed to be trained by horses. I think that's done and dusted. And it's just really very encouraging that this magnificent shed out there is being used and looked after by the users of the shed.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 20, page 104, Balabula Way Bridge over Isley Creek. Councillors 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the Director, recommendation number 1 talks about $80,000. Is that the total expected cost of repair, or is that part cost? So the Director might be able to answer that.
Mr Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, that's the estimated costs for the remediation actions we've had to take to date. So the hiring or purchasing of the props and steel work and so forth into to prop that culvert.
Supplementary, and Mr Mayor, is there any indication of what the total cost may be for this, or is it too early yet to determine that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the recommendation is that we replace the bridge, or replace the culvert with a bridge, in a similar action to what we undertook on Browns Creek Road a couple of years ago.
It was approximately 300,000 at that time. Okay. Thank you, councillors. Any other questions or comments?
Through you, Mr Mayor, Director, would you know the road is now open, is that correct, today?
Through you, Mr Mayor, per the email that I sent out late this afternoon to councillors, Emergency Management Committee and various transport operators in the region and our adjoining councils, the road is now open with no limit.
Thank you, Mr Director. Okay, councillors, I'll now put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. To item 21, Central West JO supply and delivery of road signs contract. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Any questions or comments regards to this report, councillors? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Item 22, page 110, the minutes of the Blayney Shire Sports Council meeting held Thursday, 9th November. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Councillors, do I have a mover for these? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kingham has seconded that. Councillor, on these minutes?
Been a quiet year.
Councillor
Mr.
Kingham.
Mayor. It's been a quiet year in sport in the Blayney Shire. No rugby league at all. Rugby union did very well. Netballers had to have their courts resurfaced. The seniors have been playing in Bathurst. It's just been a difficult year for sporting things, and so that's reflected on the income to the local businesses from outsiders coming in to accommodation and meals. So let's hope next year is much more active.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Hey, Mr Director.
Sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, just as a quick update, which I haven't been able to offer you, is in speaking with the contractor for the netball courts, they've been delayed getting to site until early in the new year, unfortunately. They still commit to completing the project by the end of January. It's just weather is creating issues on their other sites.
Thank you for that update, Mr Director. So there's no other questions or comments. I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Move now through to item 23, page 112, minutes of the Traffic Committee meeting held 11th of December. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 recommendations. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Reynolds would like to move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead, thank you. Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've commented before when recommendations from council committees come up for council for endorsement that we need to be careful just quite what it is that council is endorsing. That's not so much of a problem here, but when I read recommendation number 4 and recommendation number 5 as standalone recommendations, I have no idea what we're agreeing to. Recommendation 4 says that council remove crossroad intersection warning signs from both Carkle Road approaches to the intersection. Number 5, that council does not support the use of this area as an informal bus stop. Is that the crossroads in Carkle Road? Or has that got something to do with the no stopping outside the post office? As a standalone resolution, it just makes no sense.
Mr Mayor, I was going to move it with an amendment which is up on the screen for the second one, which was at 2733 Hobbies Yards Road. So I did talk to the director this afternoon about that one, and I'm happy with regard to Carkle Road as the mover, the intersection of Carkle Road and Browns Creek Road with the approaches on Carkle Road, which would explain it much better, I think. Is that correct, Mr Director?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that's correct. As soon as Councillor Somerville raised that, I spotted the Carkle Road one. If you can just move those words, Browns Creek Road, to be just before the word intersection, it'll be more appropriate.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Councillor Reynolds. Any questions or comments, councillors, regards to the minutes of the Traffic Committee? Councillor Ewan.
I ask for an explanation as why the removal of the crossroad intersection warning signs. What benefit does that gain?
Mr Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the Traffic Committee considered a request with regards to converting the stop signs to give way signs a few months ago.
Yep.
And one of the actions that was requested by the committee was to assess all the other signs on the approaches to that intersection, because there were quite a number of signs. And so they've been assessed against the Australian standard, and it's been identified that those signs are extraneous to the need at that intersection in accordance with the standard.
Excellent. Too many signs. Good. Let's get rid of some. Councillor Reynolds.
And just to add to that, there's still going to be a number of warning signs about the intersection. It's just, as the director said, it was oversigned too much and people start ignoring signs. I came around that way tonight to the council meeting, and one of the biggest challenges with that intersection is the number of people that don't stop, as in they use it as a give way intersection, and I've had reports of near misses, etc., including agricultural equipment moving across without stopping. So again, it's the community's responsibility, but we have had police actually do an inspection, but the problem is there's nowhere that you can hide. So unless you're in an unmarked vehicle, it's very hard to actually catch people going through the stop sign. But from my observations, and I do stop, and I stopped tonight, but a lot of people just don't stop at that intersection. There were a number of other items brought up, including concealed driveways, etc., that Councillor Ewan did mention, just going out on the Millthorpe Road to Millthorpe from Blayney. But because it's an RMS road or a Transport for New South Wales road, they will have a look at it and make a decision on whether those signs are required under the Australian standards. So again, a very long Traffic Committee meeting, a lot of discussion over a number of matters, but there's 5 recommendations there, and particularly with the classic Outback trial, again communicating with residents that it's on the road will be closed if that goes ahead in March of next year. So we looked at communication to make sure the residents are fully aware of that one. I therefore recommend the recommendations with the modifications to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. If there's no other questions or comments, councillors, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, now move through to item 24, page 116, the development application, change of use and internal alterations, 27 Victoria Street, Millthorpe, which was subject of our public forum earlier. We have a recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've looked long and hard at this application. I was the councillor that got it deferred last month. I've talked to the proponent, I've talked to the residents of the area. There is still some concerns about Pilcher Street and parking in Pilcher Street. There are some concerns about the intersection, but the proponent has tried to come up with some options of parking at the bowling club and providing an incentive for his customers to park at the bowling club. And while it's not the perfect solution, I'd like to see more parking in Millthorpe, closer to the CBD, and I'd like to personally see more parking on site, but I just don't think it's practical with the development. So with all of that in consideration, I will be supporting the recommendation tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any comments? Councillor Kingham.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's wonderful to see this grand old building being redeveloped, and I'm thoroughly supportive of that. However, off-street parking is less than... I've had a look at it, and I just find it incredible that the proponent could consider to only have enough for one car on site. Now, horses used to come in there with buggies and turn around, and over a course of time, things have been added to that space that's prevented cars from being parked there. My view is that the proponent should have more than one car on site. In fact, I would imagine the 6 would be a much more agreeable option. Once we give a recommendation to have a motel licence, to ask people to park on the street or down at the bowling club, I just don't think that's really fair. The other reason I'm opposing the application on the parking, on the grounds of parking, there are other motels in the Blayney Shire that are required to have on-site parking. And if one of those motels should decide to enlarge, which is quite the case, then we would have to consider an application from them to park any further residents of that motel on the street. I don't think that's appropriate. I'm thinking particularly of the Central Motel in the centre of Blayney. If they were to add a second story, in all likelihood they could ask the council those additional tenants' cars parked on our council car park, which is fairly close, a lot closer than the bowling club is to the Grand Lodge. So, Mr. Chairman, on the grounds only of on-site parking and the inadequacy of that, I'm opposing the development.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillors, any other questions or comments regarding Councillor Somervale?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I support the recommendation for a couple of reasons. I think I agree with what Councillor Kingham says. It's fantastic to see the grand old building being loved again, and I think in the fullness of time it will become one of the great attractions of Millthorpe. So I'm very supportive of it. We developed a development control plan a few years ago where we decided that in certain cases we wouldn't require off-street parking for developments, and I think at least 2, maybe 3 of the circumstances in which we wouldn't insist upon it apply here. So all we are doing, it seems to me, is applying the general principles that we adopted not long ago, a couple of years ago, which specifically provided for these circumstances. Councillor Kingham, I think, correctly points out that for a motel normally there is parking on site. motel wants to develop and, for example, put on a second story, then what's going to happen to the additional car parking spaces? Well, I think the difference there, of course, is that in this case, it's a change of use to a motel. The fabric of the building, the envelope of the building is not changing. And the number of people being accommodated in the building is not changing from when it was originally constructed. I think that makes quite a big difference. And I think the way the applicant has organised a formal arrangement for off-street parking for the overflow car park and the offer to bus whilst the property operates as a short-term accommodation for mining workers and so on, to bus them from local transport. I think that also alleviates the problem. So I think the applicant's done all that he's asked to do, and so far as I'm concerned, I'm in favour of the DA.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? I'd just like to say the opportunity of deferring this, I believe, has allowed us to excuse me, have a little bit more rigour around the parking issues, not only for this development, but indeed the entire village, which we're quite aware of. The big issue is here, and I think the applicant has now addressed it, and council has put that in regard long-term parking, and the applicant has made it clear now that that will not be an issue. Day-to-day normal parking will be appropriate, but it's now in the condition 24-hour parking in that location is not desirable, and I think the applicant has taken that on board. That is a condition that we can monitor and keep an eye on, so I think the community can have some comfort that there will not be permanent long-term use of that on-street parking, which we all use for day-to-day enjoyment of the village, whether it be tourists or the locals. So I think having the opportunity to defer this for a month has, we've come up with a better result. I think the applicant has considered the issues, and I think council has now installed a condition to help make sure that those issues will be addressed the best possible way. So if there's no other questions or comments, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Need division, Mr. Mayor.
We'll get a division. Against? I'll call for a division. So that was the 6 councillors whose names will be recorded for, and Councillor Kingham's name to be recorded against. Declare the motion carried. Now, councillors, two matters within closed committee. So in accordance with the Local Government Act 93 and the Local Government General Regulation, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following businesses of a kind is referred to in section 10.2 of the Act and should be dealt with in part of the meeting closed to the media and public. 25 is a legal matter, and we have a late confidential report, item 26 being sale of industrial land by council. Can I have a mover that we go into closed committee? Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Newstead, second Councillor Somervale. Put the motion all in favour. We're now back in open council. Thank you, councillors. And item 25, the legal matter. The recommendation was that council receive and note the report. Item 26, sale of industrial land by council. The recommendation 1. Council accept the offer for sale of land, lot 4 DP 87101015 and part lot 1 DP 1343341 for the amount of $49,500, including GST plus survey and subdivision costs. 2, that council endorse execution of relevant contracts and associated documentation by the Mayor and General Manager under council seal if required. Thank you, councillors. As this brings us close to the end of our meeting, our final meeting for 2020, I know Councillor Kingham would just like to say a couple of words. Thank you, Councillor Kingham. You have the floor.
Mr Mayor, before the meeting closes, this is the last meeting of the year. We've met 11 times during the year. We've made a lot of decisions, but the reality is that we don't actually undertake the performance of any of those. It's done by the staff. And I'd just like to convey my appreciation and thanks and goodwill to the General Manager and the Directors and all the staff of the Blayney Shire Council for a fairly difficult year with COVID-19, bushfires, drought. It's not been an easy year, and I think the staff have performed admirably, and I wouldn't like the year to pass by without noting our thanks of the councillors towards their efforts to make this council a nice place to live.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kingham. I'm sure all your fellow councillors endorse those very fine comments, and you're absolutely correct in every word that you've spoken. So, councillors, we now come to the end of our last meeting for 2020. I certainly wish you all a Merry Christmas, and people who have chosen to listen to our meeting on YouTube, on behalf of councillors, I'd like to wish all our community a safe new year as well. So now I'd like to declare the meeting now officially closed. Thank you.